Okay, so you know how we all want to be a little bit smarter about how we approach things?
Yeah, like make decisions with more confidence. Yeah, I get that.
Right. And that applies to everything, your investments, your work, even just like life in general. So today we're diving deep into the mindset of a guy who's been doing this for decades and guiding one of the most successful investors ever,
Decades. Wow. Who are we talking about here?
Charles T. Munger,
Uh,
Warren Buffett's right-hand man. Like, you can't talk about Buffett without talking about Munger.
okay, yeah, I know the name.
I just don't know a lot about him.
Right, so you give me these amazing excerpts from Poor Charlie's Almanack.
Oh, yeah. Poor Charlie's Almanack. That's Munger's book, right? It's like,
Yeah.
what, his collected wisdom and stuff?
Exactly. It's a gold mine of insights, and we want to pull out the best nuggets for our listeners. Make these principles super clear and easy to grasp.
I like that. No one wants to trudge through hundreds of pages to find the good stuff. Totally.
Yeah.
So this is like your cheat sheet to understanding how Munger sees the world. And one of his big things is this idea of worldly wisdom. Have you heard of that?
Vaguely. Refresh my memory.
It's all about building a lattice work of mental models, which sounds kind of fancy, but it's really not.
Mental models,
Yeah.
like, thinking tools or something.
Basically, yeah. He is all about taking ideas from all sorts of different fields, psychology, math, history, you name it, and using them to think more effectively.
Huh. I kind of like that.
So that's what we're going to break down today. But first, let's get to know Charles Munger a little better.
Sounds good. What's his story?
Okay, so you know about the legendary partnership with Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway, right?
Yeah.
They're both from Omaha, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I knew that part.
But the thing that's really interesting about Munger is how he combines this intellectual horsepower with real-world grit. Like, he's not just some ivory tower guy.
Oh, so he's like street smart too.
He's been through some tough stuff. The excerpts mentioned the loss of his son when his son was young. And it's amazing how he channeled that grief into an even deeper understanding of the world.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So instead of letting it break him, he used it to grow,
Really inspiring, actually. So he didn't start out just doing fancy business deals, huh?
Nope. Even after his law career, he got his hands dirty with some interesting projects. Like, he bought this rundown property and flipped it for a profit. Pretty classic, right?
Real estate. Huh. That's not what I expected.
And here's the thing. You can see the seeds of his later investment style in that early real estate deal. He was already spotting undervalued assets and figuring out how to unlock their potential.
I see it. Like a little microcosm of his whole approach.
Right. That little fixer-upper project was like a warm-up for his big wins with undervalued businesses like blue chip stamps.
Blue chip stamps.
Yeah.
What was that all about?
Well, it was his trading stamp company.
Trading stamps. Like, is that even a thing anymore?
Back in the day, it was huge. But the point is, Munger saw something that everyone else was missing, the underlying value of the business. And that's a recurring theme throughout his career. He's not chasing fads or hype. He's looking for intrinsic value.
Intrinsic value. So it's not just about the numbers.
Nope. It's about understanding the business itself, its potential for growth, its competitive edge, all that.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's dig into this lattice work of mental models thing.
Right. So I know it sounds a little abstract, but it's actually a really practical way to think about making better decisions. Munger's all about it.
Okay, remind me, how does it actually work?
The idea is you don't have to be an expert in everything. Instead, you focus on understanding the big ideas, the fundamental principles, from lots of different fields. And then you can apply those principles to any situation, no matter how complex.
I see. So it's like having different tools in your toolbox.
Yeah, you've got your psychology hammer, your math screwdriver, your history wrench, whatever you need for the job.
I like that analogy.
And that's what gives you an edge. You're not limited to just one way of thinking.
I bet that comes in handy when you're dealing with the markets, right?
Of course. But it's not just about investing. Munger uses this approach for everything.
Okay, so give me an example of a mental model that he really likes.
A good one is inversion.
Inversion, like turning something upside down.
Basically, it's about deliberately flipping a problem on its head. Instead of asking, how can I succeed, you ask, how can I fail?
Huh. That's an interesting way to think about it. I feel like we're always so focused on the positive.
Yeah, and that can be a trap. By focusing on the potential negatives, you can spot risks and blind spots that you might miss otherwise.
So it's like a pre-mortem for your ideas, right? Before you even start, you're thinking about what could go wrong.
Exactly. It's a way to stress test your thinking, find the weak points, and make your plan even stronger.
Okay, that's cool in theory. But give me a real-world example. Did Munger actually use inversion to make any big decisions?
Oh, yeah. Remember the dot-com bubble back in the late 90s?
Oh, yeah, that was crazy. Everyone was going nuts for internet stocks.
And a lot of people got burned when the bubble burst.
Big time.
Ah.
So did Munger get caught up in that frenzy?
Nope. He and Buffett used inversion to stay out of it.
What do you mean?
While everyone else was asking why will these internet companies succeed, Munger and Buffett were asking what could make them fail.
So, like, what were they worried about?
Things like lack of real profits, unsustainable business models, all that. And those concerns were totally validated when the bubble burst.
Wow, that's a great example. They basically dodged a bullet by thinking about the downside first.
Exactly. They didn't just follow the hype. They thought critically, and it saved them a lot of money.
Okay, that's pretty impressive. So this inversion thing, it's really about forcing yourself to consider the worst case scenario, right?
And you know what? It's not just for investing. You could use it for any decision, big or small. It's a great way to make sure you're not overlooking something crucial.
Okay. Good to know. So we've been talking a lot about big ideas, but I know Munger is also known for his sharp, memorable quotes, those Mungerisms, right?
Oh, yeah. He's got a knack for distilling complex ideas into these really punchy phrases. They're almost like proverbs.
Give me a good one.
Here's a classic. It's not supposed to be easy. Anyone who finds it easy is stupid.
Ooh, I like that one. Straight to the point.
It really cuts through the BS, right? And you can see how this idea permeates his whole approach to life and business. He's not afraid of hard work. In fact, he embraces it.
Yeah, he seems like a roll up your sleeves and get it done kind of guy.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's reflected in his emphasis on thorough research and due diligence. Like he really digs deep before making any big decisions.
Oh, yeah. Wasn't there something about him investing in a Chinese electric car company?
You're thinking of BYD.
BYD, yeah.
And that's a perfect example of his not easy approach.
So what did he do? Spend weeks poring over spreadsheets.
He and his team spent months, even years, understanding the technology, the market, the management team. They went all in on research before investing a dime.
Wow, that's some serious commitment. And it paid off, right?
It's huge payoff. BYD's stock has skyrocketed since their initial investment. But it wasn't a gamble. It was a calculated bet based on deep understanding.
So there's a method to the madness.
There always is with Munger. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about some of his most influential talks. You got these excerpts from his commencement speeches and things like that.
Sounds good to me. What's first?
His Harvard commencement speech is a classic. It's called Prescriptions for Guaranteed Misery in Life.
Guaranteed misery. That doesn't sound very inspiring for a commencement speech.
Right, but that's the brilliance of it. He uses this ironic, inverted approach to actually teach people how to live a good life.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Explain.
Instead of telling graduates how to be successful and happy, he tells them exactly how to be miserable. He lists all these self-destructive behaviors like being unreliable, holding grudges, abusing substances.
So he's basically giving them an anti-guide to life.
Yep, and by doing that, he's implicitly guiding them towards the opposite, the behaviors that actually lead to a good life.
Wow, that's clever. It's like reverse psychology on a grand scale.
Right. And one specific piece of advice that he highlights is don't ingest chemicals in an inordinate amount.
So basically, don't do drugs.
Well, yeah, but it goes beyond that. It's
Yeah.
about maintaining clarity of thought, not letting substances cloud your judgment.
I see. Makes sense, especially for someone like him who makes big financial decisions.
Exactly. And Munger himself is a teetotaler. He doesn't drink alcohol at all.
Ah, didn't know that.
And the material explicitly links his sobriety to his ability to make sound investment decisions.
Oh, wow. So his clear thinking gave him an edge, especially during tough times.
Absolutely. Like during the stagflation of the 70s.
Stagflation, that was when the economy was a mess. Right?
Yeah, high inflation, slow growth, the whole 9 yards. But
Mhm.
Munger and Buffett, they stayed level-headed and made some really bold moves.
What kind of moves?
They invested in the Washington Post, for example. It was a risky bet at the time, but it paid off big time.
So his clear thinking, his sobriety, it directly contributed to his success.
You got it. It's a reminder that our mental state, our clarity, it affects everything we do.
Absolutely. Makes you think, right?
It does. Okay, let's move on to his USC Business School commencement speech. It's called A Lesson on Elementary Worldly Wisdom. And here he goes all in on the lattice work of mental models that we talked about earlier.
Okay, yeah, he's big on that. So what did he say about it in this speech?
He basically told the graduates to become lifelong learners, to master the big ideas from as many fields as possible.
So, like, don't just specialize in one narrow area, right?
Exactly. He said having a broad intellectual toolkit is way more valuable than being a specialist in just one thing.
I can see that. You're more adaptable. You can see the bigger picture.
Right. And he used this really simple example to illustrate his point: compound interest.
Compound interest. That's like basic finance stuff, isn't it?
It is. But Munger showed how this simple concept can have profound implications, especially when you look at it over the long term.
Okay, so how does that tie into his investment philosophy?
Well, think about Berkshire Hathaway's investment in Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola, the drink.
Yep. They invested a big chunk of change back in 1988,
How much are we talking?
something like $1.3 billion.
Wow.
And by 2025, that investment had grown to over $25 billion.
Seriously? That's insane.
That's the power of compounding. It's slow and steady, but over decades, it can create massive wealth.
Yeah, I guess you have to be patient. It's not like a get-rich-quick scheme.
Nope, it's the opposite. It's about playing the long game, being consistent, and letting the magic of compounding work its magic.
That's a good lesson. I think I need to be more patient.
We all do. Okay, let's move on to his Caltech speech. This one's called The Psychology of Human Misjudgment, and it's all about understanding the biases that can mess with our thinking.
Oh, psychological biases. Those are fascinating. Like all the ways our brains can trick us, right?
Exactly. And Munger is a master at recognizing these biases. He actually identified around 25 common ones that can lead us to make bad decisions.
25. That's a lot to keep track of.
It is, but the key is to be aware of them. Once you know your enemy, you can start to defend yourself.
Makes sense. So what's an example of one of these biases that we should watch out for?
A really common one is called the reciprocation tendency.
Reciprocation. What's that all about?
It's that deep-seated urge we all have to return favors, even if it's not in our best interest.
Oh, yeah. I know what you mean. Like when someone does something nice for you and you feel obligated to do something nice back, even if you don't really want to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Munger points out how this can be exploited in business. Like someone might do you a favor with the expectation that you'll owe them one later.
Ah, so it's like a subtle form of manipulation.
It can be.
Yeah.
And Munger was very conscious of this. He made a point of avoiding that kind of quid pro quo culture, especially on Wall Street.
So he wanted to make decisions based on his own judgment, not because he felt obligated to someone.
That's right. He wanted to be independent, to think for himself.
I respect that. So how did this play out in his investments?
Well, there's the story of See's Candies.
Oh, See's Candies. That's a Berkshire Hathaway company, right?
It is. And Munger was really keen on acquiring it, even though some people were skeptical.
Why were they skeptical?
Maybe they didn't see the value in a candy company. But Munger did his own research. He recognized the strength of the brand, the customer loyalty.
So he wasn't swayed by the prevailing opinions. He trusted his own analysis.
That's it. And it turned out to be a fantastic acquisition for Berkshire.
Another example of his independent thinking paying off.
You got it. Now let's jump to his Harvard Law School reunion talk. This one's called Turning $2 Million into $2 Trillion.
$2 trillion. That's an insane amount of money.
It is. And obviously it's a thought experiment, but it highlights some really important principles about long-term investing.
Okay, I'm curious. What are those principles?
Munger's point is, building massive wealth isn't about luck or hitting a few home runs. It's about consistently applying sound principles.
Like what?
Like investing in great businesses with strong competitive advantages, what he calls economic moats.
Economic moats, like a castle protecting its profits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He also emphasizes avoiding excessive debt and really nurturing human talent.
Okay, so it's a long-term game, right? You're building something sustainable.
Yep. And he brings up See's Candies again as a real-world example.
See's Candies again. What's so special about it?
Well, Berkshire bought it for $25 million back in 1972.
Okay.
And by the time Munger gave this talk, it had generated over $2 billion in pre-tax profits.
Whoa. That's incredible.
It's a perfect example of how a simple, well-run business with a strong brand can create enormous value over time.
Yeah, I guess sometimes the best investments are the ones that seem boring on the surface.
Sometimes, yeah. But the returns are anything but boring. Okay, let's talk about his views on economics. He gave this speech at UCSB called Academic Economics, Strengths and Weaknesses.
Strengths and weaknesses. So he's not just bashing economics, right?
No, he's more nuanced than that. He acknowledges that some economic principles are valuable, like supply and demand. But he's also critical of how the field can become too theoretical, too detached from reality.
Okay, so he thinks it needs a dose of real-world practicality.
Exactly. He believes economics should take into account human psychology, not just abstract models.
Yeah, people don't always behave rationally, do they?
We sure don't. And that's a big part of his critique.
I bet he had some thoughts about the 2008 financial crisis.
Right. He was very critical of how many economists missed the warning signs. He said they ignored the role of psychological denial and irrational exuberance in the housing bubble.
Huh, so they were too focused on the numbers and not enough on the human element.
That's Munger's argument. And he contrasts this with his and Buffett's own approach.
Which is
They were skeptical of all those complex mortgage-backed securities. They didn't trust them.
smart move.
They were looking at the situation through a lens of worldly wisdom, considering the potential for human error and systemic risk.
And because of that, Berkshire weathered the storm pretty well, right?
They did. They didn't need a government bailout or anything like that.
Okay, so his broader perspective saved them. That's a good argument for incorporating more worldly wisdom into our thinking.
Totally. And he applied this same principle to the legal profession.
Oh, how did he do that?
He gave a speech at Stanford Law School called Worldly Wisdom in the Law.
Okay.
And he basically encouraged lawyers to think beyond just legal theory.
I bet that went over well.
I'm sure some lawyers were resistant, but his point is they can be much more effective if they understand mental models from other fields.
Give me an example. What kind of mental model did he think lawyers should be aware of?
One big one is incentive-caused bias.
Incentive-caused bias. What's that?
It's the idea that the way people are rewarded can influence their behavior, even if they don't realize it.
Oh, yeah, like if a lawyer gets paid by the hour, they might be incentivized to drag out a case, even if it's not in the client's best interest.
Exactly. And Munger contrasts this with Berkshire's approach to deals.
Which is?
They're all about fair, straightforward deals, building long-term relationships based on trust.
No shady backroom deals.
Not their style. And he uses the acquisition of Wesco Financial as an example.
What happened there?
Berkshire acquired Wesco back in 1977, and the whole thing was done quickly and efficiently.
So, like, a model of good corporate behavior.
Pretty much. It shows how understanding and aligning incentives can lead to better outcomes for everyone involved.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, I know Munger is a legendary investor, so I'm really curious to hear about his specific approach to stock picking.
Perfect timing. He gave a speech at USC Gould School of Law called The Art of Stock Picking. And in it, he lays out his philosophy.
Okay, lay it on me.
At its core, it's surprisingly simple.
Oh, really? I was expecting something super complicated.
Nope. He says you should buy wonderful businesses at fair prices, hold them for the long term, and avoid overcomplicating things.
Wonderful businesses. What does he mean by that?
Companies with strong competitive advantages, consistent earnings, good management, all that.
Okay, sounds reasonable. And I guess the hold for the long-term part is key, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He's not a day trader. He's a long-term investor.
So no trying to time the market or anything like that?
Nope. He believes in finding good companies and sticking with them.
So what's an example of a wonderful business that Munger likes?
Costco.
Costco, the bulk retailer.
That's the one.
What does he like about them?
He admires their low-cost model, their customer loyalty, their efficient operations.
Yeah, I've got to admit, I love shopping at Costco.
Me too.
Yeah.
And Berkshire has been a shareholder since the 90s. It's been a very successful investment.
I bet it has. Okay, so we've covered a lot of Munger speeches. What else do we have?
We've got some excerpts from his Daily Journal annual meetings. These are gold mines of insights.
Okay, what year should we start with?
Let's jump to 2010. It was right after the financial crisis, and Munger gave this great talk on the state of the world.
I bet he had some interesting things to say about that.
Oh, yeah. He talked about the global challenges, the economic recovery, and he was really critical of the bailout culture that emerged.
Bailout culture.
Yeah, all those companies that got bailed out by the government.
Oh, right.
And he contrasted that with Berkshire's approach, which was to avoid risky assets and stay financially sound.
So they didn't need any handouts.
They didn't. And that's a testament to their disciplined, principled approach.
I guess those principles really paid off during that crisis.
So they did.
Yeah.
Okay, let's fast forward to 2014. Munger's Daily Journal talk that year was all about life and lessons.
Life and lessons. That sounds a bit more personal, right?
It is. He had talked about the importance of lifelong learning, intellectual humility, and avoiding negative emotions like envy and resentment.
Huh. That's interesting. I don't usually think of envy and resentment as being obstacles to success.
But Munger sees them as self-destructive.
I could see his point.
And he shared how reading biographies, especially Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, really shaped his own approach to self-improvement.
Oh, so he's a big reader.
Huge reader. And he believes that personal growth is essential for professional success.
It's all connected, right?
It is. Okay, let's jump to 2017. His daily journal meeting that year was called a special meeting. And he talked about resilience, adapting to change, and ethical business practices.
Adapting to change. That's a big one, especially in today's world.
It is. And he used Daily Journal's own pivot to software as an example.
Daily Journal, the company he runs.
Yep. They used to be a newspaper publishing company, but they successfully transitioned into software.
Wow, that's impressive. So they weren't afraid to reinvent themselves.
They weren't. And Munger also talked about Berkshire's adaptability over the years, like their investment in Mid-American Energy.
Mid-American Energy, what do they do?
They're a big energy company, and Berkshire acquired them in 2000.
So even though they're known for value investing, they're not afraid to branch out into new sectors.
Exactly. They're always looking for opportunities, but they always stick to their core principles.
I like that. Principled adaptability. Okay, what's the last talk they're going to cover?
His 2019 Harvard Westlake speech. The Psychology of Human Misjudgment Redux.
Redux. So he's revisiting the topic of cognitive biases. Why'd he do that?
He felt it was even more relevant in the digital age.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, he was particularly concerned about the dangers of social proof in online echo chambers.
Echo chambers.
Yeah, those online spaces where everyone agrees with each other and reinforces each other's biases.
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. It's like everyone's just patting each other on the back and no one's challenging anyone's ideas.
Right. And Munger saw that as a real threat to critical thinking.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in that and lose perspective.
He also contrasted that with his own reliance on first principles thinking, like with his investment in BYD.
Oh, BYD again.
Yeah. He believed in the company, even though a lot of people were skeptical at first.
So he was willing to go against the grain to trust his own judgment.
Exactly. And it turned out to be a brilliant move.
Okay, so even in the age of social media and all that, it's still crucial to think for yourself, to challenge your own assumptions.
Absolutely. Don't just blindly follow the crowd. Do your own research, think critically, and be willing to stand apart.
Got it. That's a good takeaway. So what about the last parts of poor Charlie's Almanack? The epilogue and appendices and all that.
They're like bonus material.
Yeah, kind of bonus material.
You've got tributes from people who know Munger, collections of his quotes, even a checklist of his mental models.
Oh, that checklist sounds handy.
It is. It's a great way to review and internalize his key ideas.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. What would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners? What's the one thing they should remember from all this?
I think it's the power of worldly wisdom. This idea that you can make better decisions in all aspects of life by understanding the big ideas from lots of different fields.
So it's not just about being smart in one area. It's about being broadly knowledgeable, well-rounded.
Exactly. It's about building your mental toolkit so you're equipped to handle any situation that comes your way.
And for our listeners who are trying to improve their decision-making, how can they actually apply this worldly wisdom in their own lives?
I think the key is to be intentional about it. Don't just passively consume information. Actively seek out new knowledge, new perspectives.
So read widely, explore different fields, talk to people with different backgrounds.
Yep. And then challenge yourself to apply those ideas to your own life, your work, your investments.
Don't be afraid to think outside the box, to connect the dots between seemingly unrelated things.
Exactly. And remember, it's a lifelong process.
Always be learning, always be growing.
Now, to leave you with a final thought, think about this. What mental models from fields we haven't even discussed, maybe biology, engineering, art, could help you better understand the challenges you're facing right now? How could looking at your situation through a totally different lens lead to new insights and better solutions?
That's a great question to ponder. I'm going to have to give that some thought.
Me too. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
My pleasure. It was great to explore Munger's wisdom together.
Until next time.